Hello. Today we're going to be speaking about an introduction to community development. We'll identify the main features of community development and practice, include looking at definitions, the underlying values and assumptions of community development, what community development resources are, outcomes of community development, and finally, discuss what community capacity is. Just want to point out that on our course shell, there are additional resources to help you learn community development principles. There are 4 different videos that you can watch, and I just want to point out there's actually one that is from Newfoundland. Now it's about nursing, but it would have some of the same principles as in therapeutic recreation. So I encourage you, especially if you're in TR, to look at that one, and especially that it is in a Newfoundland context. It's usually hard to find videos that are about Newfoundland. So there are many different definitions of community development, but it is really a process of establishing or reestablishing structures of human community within which new ways of relating, organizing social life, promoting human rights, and meeting human needs become possible. It is also a planned evolution of all aspects of community well-being, so a very holistic perspective. It's a process whereby community members come together to take collective action and generate solutions to common problems. Other definitions, again focusing on process, a process that increases the assets and attributes which a community is able to draw upon in order to improve their lives. And it's also people acting collectively who have a common concern. Here, the definitions are looking at people at the local level to promote active participating in identifying local needs. Community development is the capacity of local populations to respond collectively to events and issues that affect them. So we can see really from this that community development is very much a grassroots process where people become more responsible, they organize and plan, have healthy options, and I should add also should be sustainable options in terms of the environment. They feel empowered. Um, they address ignorance, poverty, and suffering. It's also about creating employment and economic opportunities and achieving goals as they relate to a variety of things, whether it be social, economic, cultural, or environmental. So community development is based on values that include social justice and the equitable distribution of power and resources. Ruling arrangements in Canada are dominated by clusters of elites. You hear about, the 3% of the population, whose interests are sometimes aligned with the public interest, but more often serve their own ends. Another underlying value and assumption of community development is really that opportunities, wealth, and power are should be distributed equally. We know that often opportunities, wealth, and power are disproportionately the influence of white, able-bodied men. Community development is also about social justice, so the advancement of rights, particularly those in marginalized groups. Community development is also about improving quality of living or quality of life. And it's about respecting people and appreciating and supporting differences. And these can be differences in culture, religion, gender, belief systems, abilities, body shapes. Community development is also about the land and about being a good steward of land, water, and wildlife. So, uh, because that's one of the underlying principles, it's not really great then if a community development project or process is ignoring any negative outcomes that they're having on the environment. Community development is a process. It's a process of change, and also the process is really often more important than the outcomes. So, the journey is more important than the destination often. And not to say that obviously the destination is often solving a common need or community problem, that is important. But often the process is what will increase resources even further in the community, because in that process you're creating social connections. And what is this process? The process can be very different, and we're going to discuss process of community development later in the term. But it can be based on cooperation. It could also be based on confrontation or on a rational research-based approach to problem solving. True community development uses a bottom-up approach. A top-down approach imposes a goal and often a process on the community. The goal of community development and the way the goal will be achieved are already defined. The community then does not really determine the goal or approach, but the developer or imposes both of these. In contrast, the bottom-up approach assumes that the community determines the appropriate goals and objectives for itself. It may begin in response to a local issue, for example, high crime rates, or an externally imposed condition. For example, the community might have the closing of a fishing plant. So in response, goals may be to restore quality of life, it could be to diminish inequities, reinstate democratic functioning, enhance members' potential, or restore a sense of community among members. Sometimes a top-down approach is also required, and for example, in response to crisis. And sometimes community development might use both approaches, or government might as well. But again, true community development is bottom up. So community development then, it's about free and open participation, that everyone in the community has the right to be heard and participate, that they get accurate information and can also understand the basis for change. So effective community development should be a long-term endeavor. You might have a specific project that ends, but community development as a process is kind of ongoing. There is really no middle or end to it, if you think about it. Maybe think of it more like an ocean. The ocean is always coming in, and maybe it touches the shore more often at some times, but it's a process. It is well planned, ideally, but not always. It is should be inclusive and equitable. That's obviously a founding assumption or value. It's holistic and integrated into the big picture. It should be hopefully grassroots, where it's supported by the community members, and obviously it should benefit the community as a whole. So every community then has different resources. We might also call these resources capital. I've already introduced you to the term social capital, but there's lots of types of capital or resources that a community has. So I'm going to go through some of these. Natural capital is simply the natural resources that are around the community. So this would be the community's land, air quality, water, and that would be, drinking water as well as maybe water for recreation or tourism. You're looking at all the trees and plants, of course, and although we don't think of it this way, but minerals and metals are important as well as oil and gas. Obviously, we want to protect the environment, but these are natural resources that obviously relate to financial or economic capital as well as political capital. We have to look at the wildlife and then also the standards and legislation and policies that are related to natural capital. For example, a good resource of a community is if it has a good land-based use plan, so that when they have a long-term plan then for which areas, for example, of a neighborhood or a city should be green spaces or what would be industry, and this should be balanced. Human capital then are the people and their skills and contributions. For example, we know in Newfoundland that a very big asset or resource to a community is to have a doctor. So that is specific skill that is needed as human capital for many communities, to have strong capacity. Human capital is also about healthy families and lifestyles. It's about skills building, education, and training that is in that community. The types of hiring practices, whether people have workers' compensations or pensions. Some would also argue, having unions may help with human capital. And, obviously a community should have strong human rights and labor laws. The financial or economic capital will be things like, are there opportunities for fundraising and grant seeking? Is there access to capital and investment funding? So that means like if you wanted to start a business or you're developing an organization, are there people that you can partner with in order to get the money to, for example, build the building? It's also about the types and numbers of jobs and employers, and industries. So making sure that there's a variety of industries and that there's a variety of jobs. For example, if a community only has part-time jobs that provide no benefits, um, etc., for someone, then that's not really the strongest type of financial and economic capital that you want in a community. You want to have a variety of jobs that are part-time but mostly full-time, and different industries as well, so that your community isn't just relying on one industry at a time. You don't want to be putting all your eggs in one basket. Then there's built capital or infrastructure, and that's part of the resources needed to be effective in community development. These might be the physical buildings and structures. For example, does a community have a gathering place, an outside gathering place like a park? Or does it at least have a community center or something where you can hold community meetings and that sort of thing, and events? Is there transportation and access? Communication systems, as well as, of course, all things to do with like a city or neighborhood, like electric, hydro, sewage, garbage, etc. And also you need to look at the political systems and leadership. Cultural capital. I would say Newfoundland overall, and St. John's as well, have very high cultural capital. That's, all the festivals, multicultural groups and events, and looking at diversity with collaboration and cooperation. And finally is social capital, which we have talked about, but I want to again reinforce. And again, that's because obviously recreation and leisure is most strongly connected to social capital. So that's again sense of belonging, it's the networks, it's citizen power and participation. So for example, do people vote? Do people help each other? Are they engaged in their community? Feelings of trust and safety, diversity, and also the sharing of knowledge and resources. So outcomes of community development then include improved quality of life, uh, mutual benefit, and shared responsibility among community members. And also, this process of community development not only uses the resources in a community, its capital, but it also enhances that capital and it therefore builds community capacity. So, what is community capacity? Capacity describes processes and activities that maximize individual and community potential. So it's looking at the human capital, human resources, the organizational resources, and social capital within a community in order to solve collective problems and to improve or maintain the well being of a community. So, community capacity then is a comprehensive approach to capacity building, and it nurtures then excellence and expansion in all areas of human and community development. So that would be physical, psychological, social, cultural, environment, and economic. In this way, capacity building helps strengthen the ability of individuals, organizations, and different sectors in order to develop creative solutions that address community issues. So when we have community capacity building, we have various outcomes. We find then that people are active and interested and participating in what is going on. There's stronger community relationships, healthier people, caring families, and safer, welcoming communities. There's an increased number of community-based opportunities identified. There's the enhanced ability of community members to share their ideas on a course of action, and increased competency in setting and realizing common goals. So, they get better and faster at solving their own problems. Community capacity also provides an enhanced respect for limited resources. So, for example, this could also include the duplication or waste are minimized. And I'll give an example of what I mean by that. Several years ago, I was belonged to, various food-related groups, but one was related to the Food Security Network, and we were interested in looking at um, going to hotels who typically throw out food into the garbage and educating them on the fact that they legally they could donate the food and put them in connection with different food banks and soup kitchens across St. John's. And so we had a meeting with gathering all the different soup kitchens and food banks, and to my surprise, um, none of them really ever spoke to each other. So no one knew which soup kitchen was open, for example, on which days. And therefore, there could be days when there was no soup kitchen, or there could be days where a couple of them were open. So this is really then ineffective because you're not communicating with, people who are in doing the same work as you in order to not duplicate or waste things or to be more efficient. Community development also provides an increased awareness of the importance of protecting, advocating for, and improving the conditions for vulnerable people, distinct cultures, floundering economies, and environments. You also will get skilled leadership from community capacity and an increased interest from young people to become future leaders. And finally, through community capacity building, there's an increased ability to handle disappointment, threats, and hazards to community pride and well being. The community becomes more resilient. It can get through the hard times. So before we end, just want to go over a few of the terms. So we have community development. So again, it's really a process of self-help and mutual support that enhances local capacity for problem solving. Community capacity is essentially then the resources and the way and how many, the quality, as well as how they are all connected, and can the community then use those resources to solve community problems. So an outcome of community development is community capacity. We also have community action. You might hear that term, and that's when people are collaborating with community agencies to provide joint initiatives. So this is often when various organizations are coming together to create a big plan. So that's usually like, St. John's might have a variety of community actions. Social planning. Social planning can be used in community development, and we'll talk about that later. But it's really looking at assessing needs and capacities for the purpose of program planning and evaluation. So it's not quite as much of a bottom-up approach, a little bit, but it's obviously figuring out the needs of the community in order to make plans for future projects and where resources should go. Service extension, you might have heard of that. These are this is really about expanding the services that are provided within the community and the services that will actually address the specific needs of the community. So that's the end of our introduction to community development, where we really then looked at, hopefully you have a better understanding of kind of what the definition of community development is, what the main principles and values and philosophy are of community development, and sort of at least have some understanding then of the relationship between community development, the different resources or capitals in a community, and how that relates to community capacity and community capacity building.